Welcome to Echo Shade, where history whispers its darkest secrets and forgotten stories.
In the quiet corridors of London's most iconic palace, a soft cry announced the arrival of a child who would one day become one of the most recognized figures in the world. On April 21, 1926, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary Windsor was born to the Duke and Duchess of York. She was not expected to become queen, at least not yet, but destiny had a different plan. In those early days, the palace was her universe, a place of opulence, tradition, and unspoken expectations. Elizabeth's early life was a delicate balance between childhood innocence and the rigid discipline expected of a princess. Her days were filled with lessons, history, languages, mathematics, music, and the subtle art of etiquette. Every gesture, every smile, and every word was observed by governesses and tutors, ensuring that even at a young age, Elizabeth began to internalize the rules of her future role. She learned quickly that appearances mattered, that the world outside the palace was watching, even if she didn't yet fully understand why. Despite the structure of her education, Elizabeth was, at heart, a child who loved to explore. The gardens of the palace became her sanctuary, a place where she could run freely, chase butterflies, or watch the clouds drift lazily across the sky. She found joy in simple pleasures, a story read aloud by her mother, a game of hide-and-seek with her sister, Princess Margaret. The bond between the sisters was strong, though Elizabeth often took on a protective role. Margaret, younger by 4 years, relied on Elizabeth not only for companionship, but for guidance in a life that was by necessity governed by protocol and formality. Elizabeth's family life was colored by a mixture of warmth and distance. Her father, the Duke of York, was a man of deep introspection, often struggling with self-doubt. Her mother, the Duchess of York, was devoted yet carried the pressures of her own royal expectation. Together, they created a household where love existed but was often framed by duty. For Elizabeth, understanding these dynamics became one of her first lessons in leadership, the realization that strength sometimes meant restraint, and that compassion could coexist with authority. The world outside the palace walls, however, was far from serene. The 1930s were a time of political tension and social change. Europe was edging toward chaos, and even as a child, Elizabeth could sense the unease that hung over her country. She observed newsreels with her family, saw the discussions of diplomats and advisors, and gradually began to comprehend that the life of a princess was intricately tied to the fate of nations. In those moments, her natural curiosity evolved into a keen awareness of responsibility, a trait that would define her entire life. The abdication crisis of 1936 marked a turning point in young Elizabeth's life. When her uncle, King Edward VIII, relinquished the throne to Mary Wallis Simpson, the country was thrown into shock. Suddenly, Elizabeth's father became King George VI, and Elizabeth herself became the heir presumptive. The weight of this change was immense for a young girl of 10. She went from being a princess in line to a future queen almost overnight. The palace, which had once been a playground, now felt like a training ground for destiny. Elizabeth responded to this upheaval with remarkable composure. She began to take her studies more seriously, understanding that every lesson, every etiquette class, was a step toward preparing her for a role that would demand both intellect and grace. She observed her father closely, watching how he navigated the challenges of leadership despite his insecurities. In many ways, Elizabeth's early education and responsibility came not just from tutors and books, but from the example set by her parents. Life for a princess in the late 1930s was a mixture of public expectation and private exploration. Elizabeth attended formal events where she learned the subtle skills of diplomacy, how to greet foreign dignitaries, how to speak with confidence, and how to maintain composure under scrutiny. Yet, in the privacy of her rooms, she allowed herself the indulgence of play, imagination, and the whimsical curiosity of childhood. It was this balance between duty and freedom that began to shape the character of the young princess. Travel was another significant aspect of Elizabeth's early years. Though constrained by the formalities of royalty, she visited various parts of the United Kingdom with her family, witnessing firsthand the lives of ordinary citizens. These trips left a lasting impression on her. She learned empathy through observation, seeing the joys and hardships of people far removed from the palace's gilded halls. These experiences planted the seeds of a lifelong commitment to public service, a principle that would guide her actions as queen. Elizabeth's relationship with her sister Margaret was central to her emotional world. Margaret was lively, mischievous, and expressive, often contrasting with Elizabeth's more reserved nature. The sisters played together, shared secrets, and learned from one another. Yet, even in these moments of innocence, Elizabeth felt the quiet pull of responsibility. She knew instinctively that her path was different, that the crown's shadow loomed over her in ways that Margaret's lighter existence did not experience. Education for Elizabeth was rigorous. Beyond languages and literature, she studied constitutional history, international affairs, and the workings of the British Empire. Tutors emphasized not only knowledge but judgment, teaching her to weigh decisions carefully and consider their broader implication. By her early teens, Elizabeth had developed a keen intellect, complemented by emotional intelligence, a rare combination that set her apart even among the royal family. The late 1930s also brought Elizabeth into closer contact with the realities of global politics. With the rise of fascism in Europe, the winds of war were unmistakable. Elizabeth, though young, followed news of Hitler's actions, the tensions in Germany, Italy, and Spain, and the responses of Britain's leaders. Conversations around her, though simplified for her age, conveyed urgency and gravity. She began to grasp that her future reign would not exist in a vacuum, but within a world fraught with conflict and change. Despite these pressures, moments of childhood joy remained. Elizabeth loved animals, especially her corgis, who became lifelong companions and symbols of her personal warmth. She delighted in drawing, music, and simple games with her sister. The palace staff, often like a surrogate extended family, nurtured her curiosity and supported her development. These small comforts provided balance against the growing weight of duty, grounding her in the reality that she was still a child, even as her destiny loomed. By 1939, Elizabeth had emerged from childhood with a sense of purpose rare for her age. She was poised, thoughtful, and aware of the responsibilities awaiting her. The outbreak of World War II marked the end of her sheltered early years. The princess who once wandered palace gardens with carefree steps now faced a world in turmoil, a world that would demand courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment. And yet, even as the drums of war sounded, Elizabeth retained the quiet grace and strength that would define her life. She was a child shaped by privilege, yes, but also by observation, empathy, and an early understanding of leadership. In the years to come, these traits would carry her through challenges unimaginable for most, preparing her not just to inherit a throne, but to embody the very essence of monarchy in a rapidly changing world. The young princess, once the observer of palace life, was beginning to step into history. Her education, her experiences, and her innate sense of duty were weaving together to form the foundation of a queen. Elizabeth's early years, filled with both wonder and expectation, had set the stage for a life that would captivate the world, define an era, and leave an indelible mark on history. The outbreak of World War II in September 1939 changed everything. For the world, it was a catastrophe. For a young Princess Elizabeth, it was a stark lesson in duty, courage, and resilience. She was just 13 years old, but the weight of the nation's uncertainty pressed upon her even within the ornate walls of Buckingham Palace. Gone were the carefree days of chasing butterflies in the gardens. The world outside was darkened by the threat of bombs, political turmoil, and the terrifying march of war. Elizabeth's education now took on a new urgency. History lessons became lessons in strategy and consequence. Tutors taught her not just the names of kings and queens, but the causes of conflict, the importance of diplomacy, and the responsibilities that came with leadership. She studied the European powers, their alliances, and the emerging threats, absorbing knowledge that many adults of her age would find overwhelming. Despite her youth, Elizabeth was determined to contribute. At the age of 14, she made her first public broadcast on the BBC, addressing children who had been evacuated from London to safer countryside homes. Her voice, young yet steady, carried a warmth and assurance that inspired confidence. In that moment, the princess understood the power of presence, the ability of a single voice to comfort, to lead, to reassure a nation in turmoil. The war transformed palace life. Air raid sirens became a regular part of daily routine, and blackouts made the grand city seem like a ghostly place. Elizabeth and her family were sometimes evacuated to Windsor Castle, where life continued under strict discipline. Yet even amidst drills and precautions, moments of humanity persisted. Elizabeth played with other children, learned to ride horses across sprawling grounds, and found solace in her corgis, whose playful antics offered rare laughter in tense times. Elizabeth's parents, particularly her father, King George VI, were under immense pressure. The young princess observed his courage and steadfastness with admiration. She watched him make decisions with care, often consulting advisors late into the night. From him, Elizabeth learned that leadership was not a role of entitlement, but a duty demanding sacrifices, patience, and empathy. She internalized these lessons silently, understanding that one day, she too would bear the weight of a crown during times of crisis. As the war progressed, Elizabeth grew more aware of her own role in serving the nation. She insisted on gaining practical experience, and in 1945, at the age of 18, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, ATS, the women's branch of the British Army. Wearing a uniform for the first time, she trained as a driver and mechanic, mastering skills that were unusual for a young woman of her status. She learned to drive military vehicles, repair engines, and understand the logistics of wartime operation. This was more than symbolic participation. It was hands-on engagement in the war effort, and it earned her respect from both soldiers and civilians alike. Elizabeth's experience in the ATS was transformative. She saw firsthand the courage of ordinary men and women, soldiers and civilians alike, facing dangers far greater than those of palace life. The discipline, teamwork, and resilience she observed reinforced her own character. Here was a young woman learning that leadership was grounded not only in title but in action, in shared hardships, and in the quiet dignity of service. Life during wartime also brought Elizabeth closer to her sister Margaret and her mother. While her public duties expanded, moments of private affection became precious. Family dinners, letters exchanged in wartime secrecy, and brief walks through safe gardens allowed the sisters to maintain their bond. Yet Elizabeth's sense of responsibility grew faster than her years. She could not remain merely a child. She was now the heir to a throne in a world engulfed by conflict. Elizabeth also began to understand the global scope of her future role. Air raids on London, the Blitz, and news from the front lines of Europe made the war feel personal. She corresponded with children affected by bombings and war displacement, visited hospitals, and observed military training exercises. These experiences fostered empathy, teaching her that the monarchy was not just ceremonial. It was a bridge between authority and the people, a symbol of resilience in the darkest times. By 1947, Elizabeth had matured far beyond her age. She had witnessed courage, fear, and sacrifice on unprecedented scales. She had learned to speak with authority, to act with decisiveness, and to navigate the delicate balance between public expectation and private emotion. Her training in the NDATs, combined with her wartime experiences, gave her not only practical skills but also a psychological understanding of duty and leadership that would serve her for decades. It was also during these years that Elizabeth met the man who would become her lifelong partner, Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark. Their relationship, formed amidst a world still recovering from war, was grounded in mutual respect, shared values, and a recognition of duty. Philip's modern, sometimes irreverent approach contrasted with Elizabeth's measured, disciplined nature. Yet this dynamic would prove complementary, helping both navigate the pressures of public life. Their engagement in 1947 symbolized hope and continuity for the monarchy in a world scarred by conflict. Elizabeth's personal growth during these formative years was mirrored by the evolution of the monarchy itself. The royal family's visible participation in wartime activities, their evacuation to safer locations, and their engagement with the public strengthened the monarchy's connection to the people. Elizabeth, once a distant observer of history, had become an active participant. She learned that leadership required not only ceremonial presence but active engagement with society, empathy for its struggles. She continued to study languages, history, and literature, always mindful that her education was preparation for a future of service. She maintained a private diary, documenting her thoughts, feelings, and reflections. These writings reveal a young woman of extraordinary insight, capable of analyzing complex situations, understanding human motivations, and projecting calm authority even in uncertain circumstances. By the time the war ended in 1945, Elizabeth had transitioned from a sheltered princess to a young woman prepared for leadership. She had faced adversity, engaged directly with her country's needs, and developed the skills and character necessary for a future queen. Her experiences during the war were not merely formative, they were transformative, shaping a sense of duty, resilience, and empathy that would define her reign. The post-war years saw Elizabeth balancing public duties with personal growth. Her marriage to Prince Philip, the birth of her first children, and the gradual resumption of royal tours marked a period of transition. She carried forward the lessons learned during the war: discipline, courage, empathy, into a new era. She understood that monarchy was not only a symbol but a living institution, requiring careful stewardship, adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to service. Elizabeth's early adulthood, forged in the crucible of global conflict, had prepared her for challenges far beyond her years. She had seen the consequences of indecision, the heroism of ordinary people, and the importance of unity in adversity. Her experiences in the ATS, her interactions with soldiers and civilians, and her exposure to the realities of wartime leadership instilled in her a profound sense of responsibility. She was no longer merely a princess. She was an heir, a leader in training, and a young woman destined to guide a nation through the complexities of the modern world. By 1947, as the world began to rebuild from the devastation of war, Elizabeth stood ready to step further into the public eye. She had learned that authority was inseparable from action, that empathy was inseparable from leadership, and that the crown she would one day inherit demanded preparation beyond mere ceremony. The young princess, once sheltered in the palace gardens, had now confronted the harsh realities of the world and emerged stronger, wiser, and more resolute. The post-war years were a period of both relief and anticipation. Europe was slowly emerging from the shadows of conflict, cities were rebuilding, and families were resuming lives disrupted by years of uncertainty. For Princess Elizabeth, however, the end of World War II did not mean a return to carefree youth. Her life, already shaped by the pressures of duty and the trials of war, was entering a new phase, one marked by personal milestones, public responsibility, and the looming inevitability of a throne. In 1947, at the age of 21, Elizabeth's life took a decisive turn. Her engagement to Prince Philip of Greece and Denmark was announced, marking not just a personal union, but a symbol of hope for a nation seeking stability and continuity. Philip was a man of vigor, intelligence, and charm, whose life experiences had been equally shaped by exile, war, and education across Europe. Their courtship, though under constant public scrutiny, was grounded in mutual respect and understanding. She navigated sleepless nights, the challenges of early childcare, and the constant balancing act between family and public duties. The palace, once a backdrop to her childhood, became the stage for lessons in empathy, patience, and unconditional love. Elizabeth's role as a mother deepened her understanding of the human experience. She witnessed the vulnerability and resilience inherent in raising children, and she began to translate these insights into her growing awareness of public duty. Each milestone in her children's lives became intertwined with her own growth as a young heir, preparing her for the monumental responsibilities awaiting her. Public life, meanwhile, continued unabated. Elizabeth embarked on royal tours across the United Kingdom, visiting communities still recovering from wartime devastation. She met citizens whose lives had been shaped by sacrifice, loss, and perseverance. These visits reinforced the importance of visibility and engagement for a monarchy seeking relevance in a rapidly changing world. Elizabeth's demeanor, graceful, approachable, yet undeniably regal, resonated with the people, establishing a bond of trust and admiration that would endure throughout her reign. Elizabeth also began to navigate international relations, accompanying her parents and later Philip on visits abroad. She observed diplomatic negotiations, cultural ceremonies, and the subtleties of representing a nation on the global stage. These experiences honed her awareness of diplomacy, discretion, and the weight of symbolism inherent in her future role. Each encounter, whether a formal banquet or an informal visit to schools or hospitals, became a lesson in leadership, empathy, and influence. The young princess, now a wife and mother, continued her education with renewed focus. She studied constitutional law, the functioning of the Commonwealth, and the nuances of international diplomacy. Tutors and advisors guided her, but it was her own determination and curiosity that shaped her understanding. Elizabeth realized that knowledge alone was insufficient. Wisdom required judgment, foresight, and an acute awareness of human behavior. These lessons, absorbed in the quiet hours of study and reflection, prepared her for challenges that would soon come to define her legacy. Amidst the public duties and personal milestones, Elizabeth maintained private rituals that grounded her. She cherished moments with Philip and her children, found solace in walks through palace gardens, and kept journals documenting her thoughts, reflections, and aspirations. Elizabeth had learned that true leadership required empathy, decisiveness, and unwavering commitment. She had seen the impact of her presence on the lives of ordinary citizens and understood that her actions could inspire hope, confidence, and unity. As the world approached 1952, the threads of Elizabeth's life were converging. The culmination of education, experience, and personal growth prepared her for a sudden and dramatic transition. The young heir, once observing history from the sidelines, was on the brink of becoming the central figure in the story of a nation, and eventually the world. The year 1952 began like any other for Princess Elizabeth, filled with engagements, family responsibilities, and quiet reflection on her impending role as queen one day. Yet life, as it often does, held a sudden and irrevocable twist. On February 6, 1952, King George VI passed away quietly in his sleep at Sandringham House, leaving the nation, and Elizabeth, shocked and grief-stricken. In an instant, the young princess, only 25 years old, became Queen Elizabeth II. The sudden transition from heir to sovereign was overwhelming, yet Elizabeth faced it with the same composure that had characterized her life since childhood. She was acutely aware that the weight of the crown was immense, representing not only tradition but also the unity and stability of a nation still recovering from the aftermath of war. There was no time for hesitation. Within hours, she accepted her new responsibilities, understanding that every decision, every gesture, and every word would be scrutinized by both the public and the world. Elizabeth's first days as queen were a mixture of mourning and preparation. Her first televised Christmas broadcast, delivered with warmth and clarity, resonated deeply with audiences, reinforcing her image as both sovereign and human, a figure capable of inspiring trust and affection across generations. Her composure, insight, and sense of purpose not only guided the nation through the early challenges of her reign, but also shaped public perception of monarchy for generations to come. Elizabeth also navigated complex relationships with political leaders, balancing constitutional propriety with the influence inherent in her position. Each role demanded attention, empathy, and insight, yet she navigated these responsibilities with a seamless integration that inspired both admiration and respect. Elizabeth's story during this period was one of maturation, resilience, and influence. She participated in state visits, national celebrations, and charitable initiatives with a renewed awareness of the media's role. She adapted to changing geopolitical realities, forging connections that balanced tradition with the demands of contemporary politics. These efforts solidified her reputation as a global leader whose influence extended far beyond ceremonial duties. While Charles faced public and personal challenges, Elizabeth offered guidance, support, and discretion, always prioritizing the stability of the institution over personal visibility or controversy. Her understanding of diplomacy, statecraft, and human nature allowed her to serve as both a symbol of continuity and an active participant in shaping perceptions and relationships crucial to the monarchy's survival and success.